All right. This show will make you money. Do I have your attention? I promise. Welcome back to Owning the Goal, the podcast where we don't just talk about winning. We talk about owning every step of the process that gets you there. I am your host, Brian McFarland, and today we're diving into one of the most critical inflection points in sales. You've had the first meeting. It went well. The prospect nodded in the right places. The rapport was strong. Maybe you even laughed together. Oh man, you crushed it. But here's the next question. When you take the cab ride or the drive home, what happens next? Because every top producer knows the money isn't made in the meeting, it's made in the movement that follows it. Today, I've got the man who literally wrote the book. Here we go. Sorry if it gets it in that gray thing. There we go. Top sales producer, which is my life's mantra right now, no lie. Andrew Barbuto, sales leader and author of Top Sales Producer, said book. We're breaking down step 8 of his process. Now, if you're tuning in and you haven't heard us going through the other steps, which we have went through chronologically, do not worry. You will get something out of this episode that will help you make money. What elite sellers do immediately after the first meeting to advance to a demo, secure next steps, and ultimately land a proposal. If you have ever found yourself sitting around hoping a prospect gets back to you, this episode is going to rewrite your entire approach. Andrew, welcome back to the show. It is time number 5, so thank you so much.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me.
It was such a pleasure. All right. As I just told you as we were warming up, okay, I'm in the midst of this, and you are coaching me through literally on air. I and the listeners have had that critical first meeting. We did it so good, just like you did on our last episode and whatever. We shake hands. We've got a somewhat agreed upon next steps plan written down, and you and I leave as the co-sellers as someday we may be. And there's this great sucking sound. So what do you do? Now it's time to go because you haven't made a nickel, right? You better not be spending that commission check. So what's the story here when you leave the room?
Sure. So the best way to advance a deal beyond the first meeting is by getting the next step on the calendar before the first meeting ends. And so I know it's not always possible, but it is something we should all be striving for. And so the way you do that is by having a next step in mind going into your first meeting. So you should already have that as your goal. In my case, in any case that you're selling software, like as an ad tech, typically that is a product demo. And so, how I structure my meetings to put me in a position to set that demo up is I set the expectation up front at the start of the meeting during the agenda, before we even get into everything, which basically states, hey, if by the end of this meeting, what we discuss sounds like it would be helpful for you, typically we will set up a follow-up demo to show you the technology that we're going to be speaking about for the next 30 minutes. Does that work? Or how does that sound? Just getting that initial confirmation up front, which the goal is to say, yeah, okay, cool. It already puts that in their mind. It already gets them thinking that that's the logical next step. And when you spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes speaking about software, the natural inclination is to want to see that software, right? So by getting them to say upfront, yes, sounds good, then you have to provide tailored, personalized value during the meeting. By the end of the meeting, if you've had that great meeting and you've built that rapport and they've been nodding along, then all you have to do is reference that initial commitment and say, hey, so it sounds like this would be helpful. Why don't we set up that demo we discussed as a next step? So you could see what we had been speaking about and seeing if it makes sense. I usually try to do that if I see an opening even throughout the meeting, mid-meeting, if it's just like, they keep asking about features and features, I'll say, well, like, why don't we just I'll show you the technology in our next meeting. Like, we'll set up a demo. And at any point during that time, it makes sense to say that, it doesn't mean you have to stop the meeting right there and set it up. But what it does is you get that confirmation, and then now there's not as much pressure to, there's 5 minutes left. Let me try to close this meeting, right? You're doing it throughout. You're planting those seeds. And then again, it is an easy thing for them to agree to upfront because you're saying only if the technology we discussed sounds like it would be helpful are we going to set up a follow up demo to actually explore the technology. So when you do reference it at the end, it should be very natural. It should be just referencing their commitment they had already made, and less of a question and more of a scheduling thing. And you just simply say, "All right, cool. Like, how does your calendar look next week? Like, how are you on like Wednesday or Thursday?" And just stop talking. And hopefully, they will take out their calendar and schedule it right then and there. If they
Right.
don't, then that's where the follow ups come into play. At least get their verbal commitment to say, all right, I'll send over avails. You tell me what works best. And then, you do it then. But if you don't get it on the calendar, even if they verbally committed to it, even if they've made it very clear they want to see a demo, often it will still take multiple follow ups, which then delays the deal. So that's why it's so critical that you get that on the calendar before the first meeting ends while you have their attention.
I couldn't agree more. And, we've both been doing this a long time. And I will say I could give you percentages because I always grade myself because I've been a leader and then I've been an individual contributor. If I would say, I could easily say, if I don't get the next date on that date, it's just like dating, right? We've talked about this before.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and then you have to go back and forth on it. The, percentage of closing is going to go down, right? Coach ourselves. And then if every day I'm wrestling with this right now, we're going to get to this because I was like already saying I need your coaching on air. Um, every level of time that went by, day after day, I was like, they're thinking about 700 things than me. I'm
Yeah.
out. But when I booked them, and it's 2 weeks out, and then you see it coming up, you're like, oh, great, that I did that. Um,
Hmm.
but I will say, I'll throw it to you, kind of a little off or outline. What's the I guess it's almost like a role play sort of thing. The banter, which I've found anxiety provoking in the past. You're sitting there and you're like, hey, Andrew, sounds like we're both interested in same thing. There's success, you get the nod. Let's get that time on the calendar.
Hmm.
Now, I'm going to be like mean guy, which happens a lot. Just send me an email as follow up. What's your response to that? To try and plow through that?
Well, there's two options here, and it really just it's something that you should be able to pick up in the meeting. Like, how interested are they? Can you push it? Do they seem like they might, they're affable, or how are they going to react very negatively? So it really depends on the person that you're speaking to, and you can make that call based on that. But I'll run both scenarios with you. The first scenario is you try to you try to push for the meeting anyway, and you might do this with somebody who is interested, but maybe has got to whether it be got to run or other people need to join and they need to check their calendars or whatever the reason may be. Their first instinct is just to say, all right, send me an email with your avails, right? Like, I would hope that that they don't just say send me an email. They say send me an email with your availability. So that's a different statement, right? um, so in a scenario where you push for it and you say, uh, yeah, sure. Happy to send over avails. I actually have my calendar pulled up right now. Like, do you have any availability on like Thursday next week or Wednesday? I just want to make sure that we can get it on the calendar before schedules fill up. Obviously, the holiday is coming up, so it'd be better to just schedule it now if you can pull up your calendar.
Okay. Okay. Love it. All right. So now we're okay. So we've done our dance. We're leaving the meeting. Like what's and I'll give a quick anecdote here. My question for you to share with the listeners is what's just good standard practices that's like becomes
Mhm.
habitual. You
Sure.
walk out of the meeting in the car ride or way or whatever you're getting into your vehicle, whatever. But I will tell you one of the things that blew me away about you when we met after you prospected me off LinkedIn, I bought your book on the first day because I was that interested and it was so timely for me because I had just gotten my job going. Um, but every interaction we had, you had a response back to me within 60 minutes. And all the great ones that I know do, of which you are one. So I also want to talk about that a little bit, about how you do that, because I think that'd be great for the listeners. Maybe I'm just completely naive, or there's somebody else like me out there who doesn't know how to make sure to do that, because it's very notable. So
Mm.
walk us through. You and I walk out of the meeting. It's your account, so you own this. Like,
Mhm.
what's your mindset, and then what executionally you're doing.
So, and I think this plays into the second scenario, which is one where you can't get it on the calendar because reality is you're not always going to be able to. There are reasons why they might not be able to. They need to bring in other people is a very common one, right? So they need to check with them to see what their avails look like. But again, how they say that to you, whether they're saying like send me an email or like if they kind of seem iffy, that is a big indicator what their reaction is when you ask them to, whether they're actually going to or not, and how important it is. Because even if they say, all right, great, but they're not enthusiastic about it. They're not like specific about it. Like, um, they, they may eventually set it up, but it might take multiple follow-ups. And so, all right, here's a scenario. You say, great, down for a demo, next steps, send me your avails. I have to check with other people. Then what I'm doing from here is I'm doing a couple of things. One is I will have taken notes during the conversation, and I will then aim to transcribe those notes into something that I'll be able to reference later. Usually, it'll be either like a Word document or more likely a CRM that I can keep track of the content of our conversation. So that's number one, which is I want to put down everything we discussed, including the key needs, key feet, what was interested, what are their challenges, what are the setups and stuff like that. All of the discovery. I want to save that information so I can always reference that later on. So first is to transcribe the notes. Second step is to immediately start on the follow up. To your point, I think that it's important that you are very speedy with your follow up. So if you can, I say as soon as you could possibly send it over, send it over. Now, the only debate would be if it's right at the end of the day, and chances are they would be less likely to look at it at 6:30 p.m. than they would at 9 o'clock a.m. I have also scheduled follow ups if it would be more likely to be visible in the next day once they're getting going. But generally speaking, you want to follow up as soon as possible after the meeting. Why? Because that's when they're going to be most enthusiastic, most leaned in, most interested. That's when they're going to remember what it's going to be top of mind for them, right? So the sooner you can get the follow up over to them, the better. So what I'm going to be doing is in my follow up, I'm going to start the follow up with whatever I'm asking for as a next step. So I don't start with a recap. I don't start with an overview or in any of the follow ups documents we talked about. I start with, hey, thanks for your time. I always make sure to reference a individual. If you're speaking to a group, you don't want to say, hey, team. You want to say, hey, John, hey, Nicole, hey, Samantha, because that person will then be more likely to respond. They'll feel obligation to respond versus, hey, team, which it could be anybody, right? So you always want to direct it to an individual, the person that you're speaking to that said that they would set up time with you as a next step. From there, I say, hey, thanks for your time. How do any of these times work for you for the demo? And I'll give 4 different time slots in their time zone to choose from. And I'll even sometimes bold it. But that's how I start the email. So it's the first thing they see when they're reading it. They can very easily look at the time slots and choose one that works for them. And then I will send over a quick recap, usually, and any follow up documentation that we talked about, whether it be a deck, case studies, information, even whatever it is that comes after the attempt. Because my goal is to get that on the calendar. And that's the number one thing that I want to do with my follow up. If that is not something that you were able to do prior to the meeting ending, and then hopefully that they respond to that and you can get it done right then and there.
Okay. Can I ask you an important question? Or I'll make my joke is always, can I ask you 2 questions because I just asked you one. I've said it, so now our listeners will, or nor Andrew will hear it again. Like, anyone who's listened to Andrew and I talk knows we're just like hardcore reality. Okay. I've been wrestling with the following on this exact subject when you mentioned team, and it's near and dear to my heart when you said, hey, say, Andrew, Brian, Jane, John. Don't say hey team. And by the way, I always put women's. My order is female, women's first, names first, and alphabetically. So this way I can never be accused of playing favorites. Um, so question for you. First off, we agree on never write hi team, even if it's 8 people, write all 8 people's
Right.
names
Right.
or write them each individually, but then that can create like a mess. So then my question is, when you have a group of people, let's say 3 or more, your opinion, uh, do you, when you have subsequent follow-ups going on, proposals, deliveries, make point persons of scheduling a time, do you, A, select one because you know that's your key decision maker, at least as far as implementation, and or do you say the group is 3 plus? On proposal delivery, all the communication, not the tactical stuff, but like the delivery of stuff, do you hit it to one person and CC the rest, or do you put everybody on?
That's a good question, and I think that it's more a philosophical question, rather than a tactical question, because the way I look at my deals is I try to identify a champion, and that's usually the first person that I speak to. So at my initial meeting, most of the time I would say it's with one person, as opposed to just immediately setting up a group meeting. Now, that's not to say it doesn't happen, but I would say more often they'll be think of them as kind of like a screener, right? Where they look where we our conversation will determine whether they it's worth setting up a broader follow up with the team that may include other decision makers, et cetera. Right. So your question is, uh, as the sale progresses, do you continue to just send over, whether it be content to that individual, being addressing to the individual, or do you leave the full team on? And for me, I look at it like, after that first meeting, if they are willing to help me set up a demo as a follow-up, well, now I want them to be my champion, where I collaborate with them to help them sell internally. And so I look at it as we're on the same team now, trying to pitch their team, as opposed to me continuing to try to sell to that person and the rest of the team. It's okay. So now that you've expressed interest, let's talk about how we can position this to the rest of your team and what's going to get this over the finish line. So this just happened to me recently. I had an initial meeting with somebody who expressed interest, thought it would be a good fit. They set up a follow-up demo with key decision makers that have to be a part and ought to also be on board. What I did was I set up a pre-demo meeting with my champion to talk about who was going to be joining and what they care about and how we should position this to their team. Now, there we're collaborating together on what to present to the team and trying to get it over the finish line. And so from there, right, we had the demo, it went very well. Now I'm going to continue to work with my one champion to help support them in any way I can to progress the deal. Now, that doesn't mean that my follow up wasn't to the entire team, it was to everybody that joined the demo. But after that, and this is how you know a deal is legit, they've continued to reach out to me for things. When it's not always you reaching out, that's how you know that it's a legitimate opportunity. And so they reached out to me on a chain by themselves. And so now I have that in one chain where I sent it to everybody, but I also have a separate chain with just my champion who I'm feeding information to. And so what I plan to do from here is to continue to work with them, that champion, to collaborate on the deal as it progresses and hopefully getting it over the finish line. Uh, you know, if it was a different scenario where things weren't moving as quickly, which is, I would say, more common, and there wasn't as much proactivity from that person, then what I would do is I would still try to have a couple of chains, right, where I continue to talk to the one person here and there to like see what needs to happen to progress, get feedback, etc. But I'm also sending periodic updates to the team with everybody on it. Uh, so I want to have both communications going.
Okay, that makes sense. So, so with Andrew, because we're finding such now Thank you for that answer. That was really helpful. So we were going to progress, and we don't want we try and we keep our episodes under 30 now. So we were going to progress to advancing to the proposal stage, right? Which is where we've set up the demo. But I think we're in a really good place, at least where I want to ask you some more questions um, about this. Is okay. So first question is, you've met, let's say it's a group of 5, and you had one key decision maker who sounds like a wonderful person to you, right? They're willing to set up a pre-meeting, whatever, and that says the world. Because if you can get that person, I always call it like you've got your spy. I never want it to be negative, but you have someone on the internal who's going to say, "Hey, you want to sell this, man? Here's here's what you need to do, right? Here's the personality things of the people, and doesn't hurt to take them to a hockey game, right? We get it. This is how the world works." Um, Question: how do you? And I'm not going to say it. Do you? Because of course you do. How do you pursue the relationship building with the other 4? Because I hate to call it hit by a bus syndrome, but your key decision maker could leave the agency tomorrow.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
I've had that happen a million times, right?
Happens,
People,
yeah.
I take them out to a $500 dinner, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, I'm leaving."
Yeah.
Really? Thanks.
That happens. Yeah.
Who raised you?
Uh,
Um, so how are you pursuing the other 4 relationships? And the reason I'm asking, pausing for a second, is because I have seen, yes, I just go pursue as I would pursue, mentioning to said person who's my key decision maker, "Hey, by the way, I'm going to pursue, you know, getting the team out or whatever, but I'm linked in them and all that stuff." Why I'm spending the time to ask you is I've also upset key decision makers of mine by what they felt was over pursuing relationships because it made them feel less in control. Right now, that they had a lot of their own issues, but that backfired for me. So I know you've had experience here. So how do you look at that whole world? Because I feel like that's a delicate world,
mhm.
but it's a very important one because we can't just rely on one person.
Yeah. Yeah. That it does happen. Obviously people leave, even people that are in the middle of vetting solutions. They've got their own thing going on. You never quite know what it is. And so, yeah, it is important to have more than just one conversation at a company. Now, what I would say is that this is this also depends on how quickly the deal is moving. If we're still talking about the pre-sale stage, right, versus you're talking about post-sale where you have a client and you only have one main point of contact and that person leaves. That's a different conversation. But I'll just speak to, all right, we're in the pre-sale stage. I think that it's different if the conversation, if your deal is moving slowly, like if it's not like clear that there's proactivity on their part and they want to move fast. It's more one of those things where it's like, it's kind of getting slow walks. We're in the middle stages where maybe we have a meeting planned in the far future, or I'm still working on getting it on the calendar, and this has been kind of going. It happens, right? These things take time. So, how do you handle it? I would say this. I think that you should always include, of course, your what I call champion on any communication that you have with the broader team, right? And so, you know, when you are communicating to that team, you are addressing everybody, but that person is included in it, right? And so you're sharing updates. Hey, you reference all other people's names. Hey, here's an update. Here's information. Whatever. In my experience, they usually they don't mind that, right? Because they're including it. I think that if you ever exclude them or if you ever pursue individuals that isn't your initial champion outside of them, it can feel like you're going behind their back or that you don't necessarily trust their word. They say they're going to do something. It's like, I feel like I need to go and try to strike relationships with them. I do try to collaborate and have it be more of a partnership of me and the champion working together to sell the rest of the team, as opposed to me trying to sell those individually. The way I look at a consensus is the deal is unlikely to close if your initial champion isn't already on board and working to convince the others, right? You're not going to do a better job selling them individually than that person is. So everybody needs to be on board. And by going around their back and trying to develop relationships that exclude them, you're going to just be putting yourself at risk. So what I would always recommend is, no, it's not to say that you shouldn't try to strike relationships with them, but just include them, your champion with that, right? And if you do take them out, make sure that your champion is included, right? Chances are they'll be the ones who are setting it up and scheduling it for you anyway. But there's nothing wrong with continuing to build a relationship with a broader team by taking them out to happy hours or to a lunch or what have you, as long as the initial champion is included. And if it is the case where you have done that and the champion is leaving, yes, you do want to have that sort of line of communication to them, but more likely what will happen is um, somebody will replace your champion that comes in and maybe has to make the decision as opposed to them just continuing. Now, this is what I've had. I've had two situations that in this exact scenario happen. One of them was with somebody who um, said that I'm leaving, they were leaving, and the last thing that I wanted to do before I left, because of how much you've been helpful and our conversations have been going on so long, is I wanted to make sure to get your platform in place before I left, you know? And like, they were like, I wanted to make sure I did that, as my last hurrah. And so it worked out that way. I've had other situations where they said, I'm leaving, but here's who you should speak to, in my leave, right? Here are the best people to speak. Generally speaking, unfortunately, those conversations are not as promising, uh, because it's like, if it wasn't a huge priority for them, nobody else is going to assume it, right? In the same way that that person was. Uh, so that's another possibility. Always ask, hey, appreciate your time. It was great getting to know you. One, where are you going? Can I help you out your new company? Two, who should I be working with as my main point of contact while you're gone? Usually when they're leaving, they'll tell you anything you want to know. So you could say, listen, like, who should I be working with? Who's most likely to be interested? What needs to happen for me to close the deal? Whatever, right? They're out the door anyway, so they'll tell you whatever. You need to use that as an opportunity to like learn as much as you can. Um, and then the third instance is, the person I was working with, but I was also working with other people alongside, like the CEO. That's another thing, another reason why it's great to have a line of sight to the executive team, because chances are they're not going to be leaving, right? And they're going to be involved in some way, whether it's behind the scenes or whether it's directly relating to you. Uh, what I did here was I had separate conversations going with the CEO and the direct account team, and I would keep them abreast of each other, right? Where I'd say, hey, this is what I spoke to your CEO. This is what his interests are. Then I'd go back to the CEO and said, hey, your team is great. You have a great team of rock stars, and call individual people. So that way, you're trying to get consensus from both of them and go back and forth, keeping them both up to date. That's called like multi-threading, right? But again, you never want to exclude the person that had been helping you, set up your meetings and stuff like that, because you're going to need them on board. And your chances of closing without them, in my experience, are nil. So there's no reason to ever exclude them, but you should. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to build broader relationships.
I love your transparency. That got a good laugh out of me, but I was on mute. Your chances are nil. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I can imagine you as a future CRO one day just saying, what do you think your chances are? I can tell you they're nil. All right. Well, as we like to keep it under 30, first off, I just want to thank you so much, Andrew. We delivered on a promise of making people money because we're helping them move from that meeting into the next step. And now we know you're yearning for the next episode, possibly our last one of 2025. But we could probably squeak two more in to now getting from this demo into the proposal stage and moving it down the funnel. So it's a great ongoing series. I can't wait to do it. Anyone who wants to stop living in the follow-up limbo, you just heard it, start advancing deals with purpose, needs to rewind this episode and take notes. I would, and I will. Step 8, it's all outlined, or get the book. That's even a better idea. Step 8 in Andrew's book's Top Sales Producer and Accompanying Workbook isn't just a tactic, it is a discipline. If you've ever wondered why, as I often do, your pipeline glows, but your close rate doesn't, this was a big step in that difference. And I got some tips. Thanks for joining us, as always. It's always powerful having you being here. For everyone listening, and from what I hear from people and what we see on our posts and whatnot, grab the book, Top Sales Producer, if you haven't yet. If you've got that salesperson in your life, give it to them. It's a great Thanksgiving or holiday gift. And remember, in sales and life, success doesn't happen because of the meeting. It happens because of what you do after it. That's how you know you owned your goal. Andrew, thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
Of course, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving to you and to our listeners. This has been the 5th episode with Andrew, for which we are grateful. Have a great day, whatever you are doing.